Hey, hi, hello, it's me. You have not seen me in years. We will not be discussing where I was, what I've been doing, because it does not matter. And also, I think that's really cringe and really silly. So instead, what we're gonna do is talk about all of the books I read throughout 2024. We're gonna jump right into the stats because I made a cute little PowerPoint and I'm gonna put up the slides when we're talking about the thing, and it's gonna be really fun and really cool. Okay, just you know how this works, just cool off. All right. So here's the deal: we were reaching peak brain rot levels of illiteracy for a hot minute. Like, we were in the danger zone. Like, I was kind of forgetting what letters looked like for a little bit. I am one of those people who used to read like obsessively. Like, that was just a really big hobby I had, and then I fell off of it when I went to college. Don't know why. Probably stress, probably depression, who knows. So last year I made the goal, I just wanted to read 24 because it was 2024. It was a fun little thing. My partner also made the same goal, so we kind of had like a consistent little routine of just making time to read last year. And it worked. I read all 24 that I wanted to read, and honestly, if I wasn't silly and out of practice, I probably could have read more. So the goal for 2025 is that I want to read 25 books. But that's a fun one. I was using Goodreads and Storygraph, just both, because I couldn't decide what I liked using more. It's just a for funsies thing. But Storygraph was fun because it also gave me stats, which I like to see. They estimated I read 7,030 pages this year, which a lot of people actually complain about the page count on Storygraph and on Goodreads because they just say that they're not like accurate. I don't know about that. I just thought it was cool. It's a fun number. I kind of feel like I may have read more, but I'm not complaining, so I guess we'll see. 2 out of the 24 books I read this year were nonfiction, and when we get to them, we will get to them. That's not surprising. I'm a fiction girly. I don't typically read nonfiction books. So the average time it took me to finish a book was 4 days, which big bully book people will argue that those results are very skewed. And by big bully book people, I mean people that know me in real life. They're going to tell you that the results are skewed, and they're probably right, because I went through this phase where I would read a book and then not read for a little bit, and then I would read like 4 books in a day. So, you know, we're going to see how accurate 4 days as an average is this upcoming year if I keep up my little track record. All right, so most of the books I read this year are classified as horror and thriller. I'm a really big Ira Levin fan. I love a vintagey horror book. Rosemary's Baby is actually my favorite book of all time. So I was kind of chasing that high. I was just kind of going on books that I know are kind of similar to that, or that were advertised as being kind of similar to that, and picking up anything else that was interesting along the way. Thrillers are also just fun, silly reads because I love a little twist. So do with that information what you will. When we were initially, okay, listen. So when I initially said that I wanted to read more books this year, we made a ranking scale, but it wasn't like an official one. It was just, oh, we're gonna rank it 1 to 10. I hate a 1 to 10 ranking scale because I just feel like it's not easy to tell what you thought of the book that way. So I actually went through all of these again and re-ranked them and made a new scale. So now it's 1 to 5, and they actually all have meanings. So a 5-star is loved it and would read it again. We'll be keeping it forever and ever and cherish it and pass it on to the future generations. I don't know. 4 is that I really liked it, but meaning that there is like 1 or 2 things that kind of kept me from being absolutely in love with it. 3 is a rating that I called church wafer, or just mid. So it's something that I wouldn't really go back to, but also there was nothing really wrong with it. So I usually just put books that like maybe I didn't particularly enjoy, but there was nothing really wrong with it. I just didn't really like it. So that's usually what's there. 2 is that it sucked, but it had a cool thing. So it's as described. It sucked, but it had a cool thing in it, or I saw what it was trying to do and just don't feel like it hit it. And 1 is get the fuck out. So those are books that I'm absolutely just not keeping and probably not really wanting to recommend to other people. So if your favorite book ends up in that category, I'm sorry. We can still be friends. Don't yell at me. All right, so we're just gonna jump right in. We're gonna go in kind of chronological order. So starting back in January with the first book I read in 2024, it was actually I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. This book came out, I think, in the summer of 2023, and everybody had kind of been trying to get their hands on it and read it as quickly as possible. Partly to do with what I feel like was mismarketing of the book, and I don't know how much of that Jennette actually had a hand in. Because I know like a publicist and like the media frenzy surrounding anything that a celebrity does kind of just takes things and runs with it, and I think that may have been what had happened here. People were saying that this book was like so silly and so funny and like, oh my gosh, like it's tea, it's a drama book. It is not that at all. I'm just gonna tell you up front. I feel like you guys have all probably read it. If you're watching this, you've probably read it. If you haven't, it's a memoir about Jennette's early life and kind of what pushed her and things she faced when she became like a child actress, growing up in Hollywood, those kinds of things. So that's a chunk of the book, but then like the bigger portion and like the meat and potatoes of everything is this underlying thing where she's exploring what it was like to have a very abusive home life and also a lifelong struggle with an eating disorder. Those are not things that people were talking about when they were talking about this book, and I want to know why, because that felt like more the point than anything else, because she doesn't really focus on the events that happened to her as she's an actress or as she's in Hollywood. It's more like, hey, I was experiencing these traumas at home, but also I was a Hollywood actress. That being said, I feel like it's really weird to kind of rank this or try to putting it on a ranking scale because it's literally like reading someone's diary. I did still do it. I gave it a 4 stars. The pacing was a little bit off in this, so that was kind of why I bumped it down to a 4-star. It was uncomfortable at times, but I feel like, you know, knowing the content now, you could probably assume why. Not a bad book at all. Enjoyed it. I would like to see her write other things because I do know that like she's written short films, and in this book expresses that she has a really big passion for writing. So I'd like to see what else she does. We're going in hot on the second book of the year. This was also in January. This about kicked me out of everything. I literally wanted to give up, and it's the second book because of the way that this made me feel. So let me set the scene. It's called Children of the Night by Richard Lortz. The first 2 chapters have awesome world building and set the stage for this really cool character-driven monster story. And it's scary and gory and like just so weird, right? And at first, like when I'm reading this, I'm like, oh my God, it's werewolves or like feral children or something, right? So I get 50 pages in, flip the page to 51, immediately everything that was going on does not matter anymore, and you never talk about it again, actually. I felt like I was going crazy when I was reading this because I was like, okay, well maybe, you know, there's a reason that all of this is happening. Maybe like if I keep reading, like it'll go back to the cool monster story that it was supposed to be, and it just never does. It progressively gets grosser and grosser and so far away from the plot, and he goes on these random tangents where he's just being really racist and really weird for a whole chapter and a half, and then it switches characters and there's like another thing that happened. I don't know, dude. It's insane. Only 87 other people have read this on Goodreads or like have this on their shelf, and all 87 of them have given this a 1 star. This came into my possession because I was at a Half Price Books and found it, and like the back cover of it, I wish I had the book. The back cover of it literally was just like the lead up to the big gory scene in like the first chapter, and it sounded really cool. So I don't know, I was misled. I was led astray by the Half Price Books clearance rack. So it won awards because they think that he explored what it was like to live in low income and poverty stricken areas really well, or like that this represented like a marginalized community very well. Like it doesn't. I don't know how to describe it. I don't want to recommend this to you, but if you are in the market for something that'll absolutely piss you off and just make you like, I don't know, feel crazy, like this is probably one to read. I gave this a 1. I did end up recommending this to my sister because once again, I felt insane. I was like, it has to be me. If this won awards and people are like not talking about this like it's the worst book ever made, like maybe it's just me. She also couldn't get through it. I finished it all the way, but she gave up like halfway because she was like, why are we reading this? So I don't know, Children of the Night by Richard Lortz. Hated it. Worst book I've ever read, probably. The third book I read was Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. It is complicated. So it's basically a character study about this family who is grieving the loss of the oldest daughter / oldest sister after she commits suicide. So the entire point in the book is just to follow them along in the aftermath of this event and kind of how it changes the trajectory of their lives and sort of how they're grappling and, I don't know, just handling the situation, really. But then juxtaposed to that is also the narrative of the sister before the event happens, and it kind of talks about like the things that had led up to her making the choice to do what she did. This felt like swallowing gravel, not gonna lie to you. Like, this hurt my feelings. I was in love with the writing style. It's a character study, so it's not so much about the plot or about the thing that happens because you already know what happens. What you're more interested in is seeing kind of like where things go, and like, I don't know, it feels like everybody in the story is drowning almost consistently and you cannot help but watch. That being said, I did not give a fuck about the parent characters in this story. I thought they were both lame. They made sense for a couple of chapters and then just stopped making sense. So I care about the brother and the littlest sister and then like the narrative from the oldest sister, but the parents I could just write off, which is unfortunate because that is nearly half the book. So I gave that one 4 stars. So the next book I read was called A Certain Hunger by Chelsea G. Summers, and it is basically just about a food critic turned cannibal reflecting on eating her ex-lovers. Simple premise, I know. It's like Hannibal meets American Psycho meets a MILF. Really loved it. I support women's rights and wrongs. I dug it. The only thing that really threw me off is that with Dorothy being the villain and the main narrator of the story, she is a self-diagnosed narcissist and psychopath. So sometimes throughout the narrative, she starts going on these really weird tangents. And you are just kind of like, bitch, get to the point, because it's throwing the pacing off. So, I don't know. She fed a little bit too much into the character and forgot that there was also a plot that you were moving along in. So, I gave it a 4. But it was fun. Next book was Down the Drain by Julia Fox. I don't know who the fuck Julia Fox is. Not before nor after I picked up this book. This is a memoir on her life. I picked it up just because I liked the cover and I thought it was fun. And it was very fun. I've never seen a woman live 9,000 lives and make the worst possible choices in all 9,000 of them, but still somehow it's like you mess up so bad that things turn out fine. It's a roller coaster. I really enjoyed it. The only thing that I think threw me off about it was that the pacing was really disjointed and weird, because the whole vibe of the book is like you're at a slumber party and she's gossiping at you, not to you. So you're not in the gossip. She's just kind of spilling the beans about everything that she's ever done in her life. I recommend it. It's fun. You don't have to know who she is to read this book. Super recommend it. A lot of people also said the audiobook for this was really good because she reads it herself. So I don't know, if that's your cup of tea, do that. The next book I read was Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. So I feel like a lot of people probably know about this because it was really hot last year for people to be reading this and doing like big book reviews on it. I also think it probably came out a couple years prior, so a lot of people had read it before that as well. It's a fictional story about the victims. I was trying to think about how I was gonna say this. So it's a fictional story about the victims of, quote unquote, the defendant, a serial killer from the 1970s. We're gonna call him the defendant because I actually really liked that in the book. They made it a point not to say his name all throughout it, so it was really cool. So it's about the victims of the defendant. One is a survivor of his last attack, and then the second narrator is from an attack that had occurred many years prior, right? So the entire book basically encompasses like the aftermath of both of these events and the people fighting to bring him to justice and the media circus that kind of surrounded him at the time, as well as like the miscomings of the police during the whole entire case. So that being said, I have a gripe and kind of a bone to pick with this book because I I think it's just the same way that I look at all true crime media, because I used to be one of those people like, oh my god, like true crime, right? And then I kind of sat back and I thought about what we were doing and I was like, well, wait a fucking second, actually. So I'm really critical about this kind of content. My biggest gripe with this is that it feels a little bit hypocritical to make a book not saying this person's name, but then having written an entire book about him. Not necessarily like about him, but still like, I don't like, why do you have to use them at all? Like, why couldn't you just make the entire thing fiction, right? So that's a little bit quirky. I think a couple people have also probably spoken about that. I don't know what the draw for that was, but it does create a really interesting play, because obviously like the title Bright Young Women is a play on what the media was referring to him as at the time, because he was just a bright young man, that sort of thing. The next book is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. At its core, it's a story about 3 women being moms, and that's pretty much it. Their lives are connected by kind of like happenstance. Like a baby gets adopted in the community that they're in, and all of their kids start interacting with each other. So it's just kind of like a domino effect sort of thing. So all 3 of these narratives are happening at the same time, but they're all doing very different things. So the book tries to study a lot of things all at once, and it makes the title really fitting, because it's a book about classism, racism, motherhood, grief, and like a million other things that are all happening. That being said, it felt really flat because it was so fucking ambitious. Like, you couldn't focus on any particular problem or any particular theme that it was trying to run with, because so much was happening. A lot of people say like, oh, it's a challenging narrative, like it's something fun to read, and I was like, no, I was just fucking stressed the entire time. I was just stressed the entire time. This wasn't fun. No, I'm not having fun. So a lot of the characters just kind of felt hella annoying instead of flawed. The pacing was funky. I only really cared about 1 or 2 of the characters. The most interesting narrative is the adoption storyline, and it maybe gets like 30 something pages of actual like screen time between the characters that are really truly involved in that. Why? So this was kind of disappointing, because I really liked the other book, obviously, and that was her first novel. So everybody was like, oh, you know, if you like this, like the second one is so much better. And I know that this one actually got a TV show, and it had Reese Witherspoon or something in it, and people really liked it. So I was really looking forward to it. And it just kind of fell flat for me. And I don't know if that's gonna like get me roasted at the stake or not, but I don't know. It was just kind of mid, so I gave it a 3. The next book is actually a reread. It's Love is a Dog from Hell by Charles Bukowski. This is not an actual story. It's a book of poems. I read this in maybe my senior year of high school, and then again in college, and I just really like it. I really like Charles Bukowski. Don't crucify me, okay? Like, listen, let me explain. So I know that he is a filthy, nasty old man, but a lot of the poems that he writes are actually really interesting and fun to read and fun to pick apart. This is a fun reread for me, because I guess the last time I read it, I had annotated some of the things, so it was kind of fun seeing like the things that were sticking with me and the things I was pointing out when I had read it. Yeah, I don't really have too much to say about these. It's poems. I would say that because this is a compilation of like some of his longer, rantier poems, it's not necessarily my favorite. I feel like his shorter form stuff packs a harder punch in what he's trying to say, and also gives him less time to be a little bit fucking freaky. So I gave this one a 4. It's really good though. Death Valley by Melissa Broder was the next one I read. It's another weird one. It's about a woman who, she's an author, and she is just completely fucking grief-stricken because everything in her life kind of sucks. Her dad's in the ICU. Her husband has this chronic illness where he's just getting sicker and sicker by the day, and she can't really do much to help him. So she takes a trip out to the desert to just kind of like recharge and finish her book. The next book is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood by Quentin Tarantino. Wait, stop. Don't jump into the comment section and yell at me yet. Let me defend myself, okay? First of all, I like Quentin Tarantino movies. Do not talk to me about it if you do not, okay? I don't care. So if you have never seen the movie, or if you've never read this book, which I'm assuming maybe you haven't, it's just a story about Hollywood in 1969. There were a lot of things happening in 1969. So you follow 3 real people characters and 2 fictional characters. So what I will say about this is that it does kind of feel exactly like what a novelization of a movie would feel like. I feel like in this scenario, it's kind of like he just took the script and copied and pasted it and then maybe added like a couple scenes here or there to fill it out. That being said, I kind of don't mind that. This is Quentin Tarantino's first novel, so I wasn't really expecting like a whole lot of crazy stuff to be happening. And also with this kind of story, I feel like it would be kind of difficult for a lot of the things that are happening to translate well. Like that was one of my biggest gripes, is actually that the pacing felt pretty off because of how many characters you're meant to be following in this. It's just really hard to transition between everyone, and also to make everyone feel like a full-fledged character and someone who's fleshed out, whereas like in a movie I feel like things are moving faster, but you also have that visual counterpart, so things, I don't know, it's just like the flow is different, right? That being said, he writes the dialogue quote unquote like realistically, the same way he would in a movie. The scenes are set up and built and described to you really realistically. I don't know, I don't have too much to say about it. It was a fun read, it was a quick read as well. It looks like a behemoth of a book, but it's really not. There are some fun extras, there's like a couple pictures and there's some comic strips at the end. I thought it was fun. My big thing is that with this being his first novel, I don't know, I kind of just wish it was something that didn't have a movie counterpart. I feel like that's where this is kind of like the weakest, because like I'm reading this and I'm just kind of like, okay, well, it is the exact same. I kind of just want to watch the movie. So I'm kind of interested to see like if he keeps writing, like what it would look like to have a book that doesn't have a movie counterpart. I gave it 4 stars, by the way. Now we're getting into a trilogy of books that my sister recommended to me in the middle of the year, because I had hit like a reading slump after the Quentin Tarantino thing. So the first book that she recommended to me is Diary of an Oxygen Thief. Okay. These were really big on Tumblr back when I was on Tumblr. I never read them. I skipped them on purpose. They didn't look interesting. I'm glad that I skipped them back then. Unfortunate for me now, because I have read them. So Diary of an Oxygen Thief is about a sex addict and self-proclaimed sociopath. He's a huge piece of shit, is what he is. He wrote a book about it. That's it. It's fiction. Like, it's fake. It's not real. But it feels real. It's gonna be real when I catch whoever the fuck wrote this. Yeah, it's a nasty, foul book. Hated it. Gave it a 1 star. I don't feel like anything was fleshed out. The character is literally just talking to himself for 180 pages. He's fucking his own hand for 180 pages. It's not fun. He is making everybody around him miserable, but none of the characters that he's making miserable give him anything to bounce off of, so you're just meant to like read this guy being miserable and deplorable. It's just not a fun read. I feel like it would have been fun if he got any sort of comeuppance, but he just doesn't, so gave it a 1. The second in the series is called Chameleon in a Candy Store, and obviously I read that next. The second verse is the same as the first, but this time he's online dating and he has a little bit of character development, and we get a little bit more insight on why he's doing the things that he's doing. Not a lot, but is still some. He also does have other characters that he kind of interacts with throughout this, through like the text online, and also I think there's a couple scenes where he's actually talking to people. So again, he's humanized now, so that makes it suck a little bit less for you as the reader. It makes it a little bit more enjoyable because other people are telling this guy that he's a fucking asshole. So it's all right. I kind of feel like the series would have been better if it were published in reverse. Like if this one came first, that would have been, like, it probably would have been a better lead up, but then maybe people would have been pissed about the second book, so I don't know. I also think maybe this is one where he could have just combined the 2 things. Like maybe they would have been better as 1 book instead of 2. I gave this one a 2 star though, again, because he's kind of humanized. It still sucks though. I don't know. So the third book she recommended to me is not related to those 2, so throw that out of your head. This is a little bit better. It's called Zoe Letting Go by Nora Price. This book's biggest crime is that it wasn't Winter Girls by Laurie Halse Anderson, so I'm gonna talk about it, but please, like, I enjoyed it. It was fun. It's just not my cup of tea. This is a young adult book. It's a story about a girl who goes to an eating disorder recovery house. but she doesn't have an eating disorder. So the whole point in the book is that you're kind of unraveling what the real plot and the real situation is through her therapy sessions, through her interactions with other girls in the house, and also through the letters that she's writing to her friend who is not in the recovery house with her. It's a young adult book, and I just, again, feel like I read Winter Girls by Laurie Halse Anderson, and like, they are very different. Like, I'm not meaning to say like, oh, this book copied this book. They coexist. They're fine to coexist. I just prefer Laurie Halse Anderson as an author, I think, to Nora Price. That's really it. There's not too much to say about it. I gave it a 3. This is my sister's favorite book, apparently, so I'm sorry that I'm roasting it so hard. We did talk about this before I got on here and just started slamming all 3 of the recommendations that she gave me. She knows how I feel about them, so. The next book I read was The Stepford Wives by R11, because I'd never read it. I kind of talked about at the beginning of this that Rosemary's Baby is my favorite book, and I really liked R11. I really like this book. This was a 5-star. If you have never read it / have never seen the movie, it's basically just, in summary, it's about a family that moves to like this planned community and everything's really perfect and pretty, and then they start slowly realizing that maybe it's not. Very good. Classic horror. Love the twist. It's pretty good. I actually did not think that I would be as stressed as I was when I was reading this, because I was like, oh, I kind of know what happens, and then it was like, whew. I really like the way that Ira writes women because it's all very relatable. Like, the dialogue makes a lot of sense. The way that the characters interact feel really real. I just really dig it. Also, this is so short, but I feel like so much happens, and he doesn't make the pacing feel off at all. Like, this is really good all the way through. Perfect book. The next book was The Husbands by Holly Gramazio. This is a story about a woman who comes home one night and is married to a man she's never met before. Antics ensue. I gave this a 3, and it's because I was kind of let down, because when I picked this up and I read the synopsis, I literally thought this was going to be a horror novel, because what the fuck do you mean you came home and you were married to someone that you had not met? Immediate fear with an exclamation point. What? It's not a horror book. It's not even really a thriller. It's kind of like a comedy. The entire book is sort of tackling like the idea of soulmates and like finding the one. It kind of just feels like you're reading about someone using Tinder for the first time. That, you know what, I'm gonna leave it at that. That's the best summary I can give you for this book. It had a really fun concept, but like I said, I think it could have just been shorter because it dragged out a lot. And also the ending of the book made me feel a certain kind of way. Like, I don't want to spoil it because I feel like this is a newer book. People probably still haven't read it, and there are probably people who are looking forward to reading it. I gave it a 3. I don't know. Let me know what you think if you've read it. Next book was My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. This is my first time ever reading something by her. I know that she's really big in the scene right now. This book is about a woman attempting to hibernate for a year in order to reset her mental health and kind of like sleep away all of her problems. Unreliable narrator trope. It's kind of an absurdist take on mental illness and depression, but it's really, really well written and very well paced. A lot of people have beef with this book because they're like, oh, it's an unrealistic depiction of mental illness, and like, I hate the main character because she's so privileged. And I'm like, are we reading the same thing? Because I feel like that's kind of the point. I don't know about you, but like, when I'm having one of my episodes, I do feel like I want to sleep for a year. Like, I kind of get where this bitch is coming from. And like, also her being privileged is kind of the point, because it's talking about how, like, she even talks about it herself in the book. She talks about how like nothing should be wrong. Everything in her life, like, she just feels empty. It's talking about like the chronic emptiness that you have when you are mentally ill. What's the deal? Really layered narrative, and it's kind of surprising because, again, the main character is a very privileged, very shallow person, so you don't think that there would be very much, but there is. I keep seeing people kind of like talking about like what some of the things that happen in this book actually mean, because there's a lot of symbolism in it, and I'm seeing a lot of really cool discussions, at least coming from the people who don't absolutely hate it. Also, in my little slides, I put 9/11 with like a million exclamation points. I will not be elaborating. I gave it a 5 stars. The next book was Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. Everybody and their mom has already read this. I have seen the movie quite a few times, so I saw this in Half First Books and I was like, I'm gonna pick that up and I'm gonna read it. If you don't know what this is about in any capacity, it's basically just a man becomes a prime suspect of his wife's disappearance, And then he slowly starts to suspect that maybe the incident was planned and that he's been framed. There's a reason that this smashed back when it came out. I actually felt like I was gonna start ripping out my eyelashes and eating them when I was reading this because it was so tense. I don't know, it's really fun. I really liked it. It is really tense though. I gave it 4 stars really just because of like my level of enjoyment. I don't think that there was really anything wrong with the book. Maybe the pacing was a little bit funny. Like, you're just, you know, given a whole bunch of like extra characters and extra scenes to kind of fill the space, whereas in the movie it's just kind of like cut to scene, cut to scene, cut to scene, right? There was just a couple things in the book that I felt like could have been cut down to make it a little bit shorter, but it was still really good. So 4. After Gone Girl, I ended up reading Sharp Objects, also by Gillian Flynn. This was her first novel, so this was before Gone Girl. This book's about a journalist who goes back to her hometown to report on the death of a preteen girl and the disappearance of another. While she navigates this, she deals with a turbulent home dynamic between herself, her hypochondriac mother, and her 13-year-old half-sister who she doesn't really know. This book was a trip. I thought that I had clocked what this was about for a majority of the book. And you get close to the ending and you're like, oh yeah, totally, like I knew what this was. And then, you know, it's like the knife is there because it is still a twist, but then it twists again. And you're like, what the fuck, right? So like it was a 4-star when I thought I knew it was happening and when I called it. And then it turns into a 5-star because of that second little twist. So I'm not going to talk too much about this. I gave it a 5. Really weird, really interesting. This kicked Gone Girl's ass, so I'm actually kind of surprised this didn't get a film adaptation. This feels like a V.C. Andrews book. V.C. Andrews ghost wrote this, I feel. Next up was Drive by James Salas. Stuntman by day, getaway driver by night. It's a noir book. Like, that's it. I really liked the movie Drive. When I saw this, I kind of didn't realize that it was a book first. So I was interested in reading it, and I'm really glad that I did because it was really fun. It's out of my comfort zone, so it's not something that I would typically read. This is really good though. It's really short. A lot of noir books typically are, especially when they're just like kind of crime dramas. The only thing that I will say about this is that the pacing and like the way that the narrative kind of cuts up back and forth is a little bit confusing sometimes and hard to follow if you're not paying attention, but it's really well done. I really like all the characters. One of the big notes I had for this was just driver with like 16 heart emojis. And I'm not gonna elaborate on that either. Read it, you will find out. This next book pissed me off. I was so excited to read this. I was looking for this everywhere and then I finally found it. Okay, so the book is Piglet by Lottie Hazel. A soon-to-be bride and food editor who forcibly goes by her childhood nickname of Piglet is on the verge of a breakdown weeks before her wedding after her fiance unveils a quote-unquote terrible secret to her, which causes her to rethink the whole relationship. This is the only thing we know about the book. I was like, okay, that's interesting. That sounds silly and fun. It's not silly or fun. This entire book made me realize, 1, eating disorder plots are fucking boring. Tired of reading eating disorder plots. Why is this happening? 2, you're supposed to empathize really heavily with the main character, but I fucking hate her. She doesn't make a single good decision throughout the entire book. I don't really understand what's driving her as a character because there are parts where I kind of feel like, oh yeah, that's kind of relatable, like I kind of get where she's coming from, but then she turns it on her head and does like a complete 180. She doesn't develop at all throughout the entire story, even though the story wants you to think that she does. Annoying. She treats all of her friends like absolute trash when all of her friends have just been very kind to her. The most interesting characters in this book are her friends, and they don't get like any time to do anything really. So that was just really disappointing. It just felt half-baked. It's not my jam. I think that this is her debut novel, so I feel kind of bad that I'm like super bashing it, but truthfully, honestly, I just think that everything in this could have been developed a little bit further. Also, I don't think it's a spoiler alert. I'm just gonna tell you because this is something that I probably would not have gone into if I knew. They're marketing this with like the terrible secret. You don't know what the fuck it is. They don't talk about it. It happens on like the in-between of a transition to another chapter, and then like you're just meant to do whatever, which is like fine, right? You don't need to know everything about every single character. You could probably draw your own assumptions and assume, but also the payoff is that you would know what it was, especially if it's something that's causing her to spiral this badly, right? But they don't talk about it. There's never a conversation. So I don't know. I gave it a 3. Truthfully, talking about it, it's pissing me off all over again. I probably would have given this a 2. Next up was My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. So I bounced from that low up to high. I gave this 5 stars, and I'm telling you that right off the bat. This book is exactly what it sounds like. It's about 2 girls who are best friends, and then one of them starts acting different, and they're like, hey, are you possessed? And they don't know, but then it turns out, spoiler alert, she is possessed. Very good, very campy. I really enjoyed it. I don't want to talk about it too much because, again, this is something I don't want to give away. Also, I saw recently that actually on Amazon Prime, they turned it into a movie. Don't know how that's gonna go, but I am interested. I gave it a 5. I had fun with it. Even if it's not like the best written book, I had a lot of fun. Night Bitch by Rachel Yoder is up next, and this one is also one that I was really let down by, actually, because this is another one that I searched everywhere for, was really looking forward to, because the description is just that it's an artist who decides to be a stay-at-home mom, and then over the course of being at home, she starts thinking that she's turning into a dog. Fear with an exclamation point, that sounds scary as hell. That's a horror book, right? Is not a horror book. It could have been werewolves, but it wasn't, and I'm disappointed that it wasn't. I think the rating that I'm giving this and the reaction I'm having to this is just because I'm not the target audience. This is very much a book, I think, that's just kind of exploring like the rage that kind of comes with motherhood and like postpartum and those kinds of things. I'm picking up on those themes like very heavily, and I think that this did really well with those crowds. A lot of people actually really liked this book. I don't know why I'm talking about it like, oh, everybody hated it. No, I'm just being a hater, strictly, and it's because I'm not the audience. I'm not going to spoil it because, again, this is one that's still really popular. I think it actually also just got a film adaptation. I actually think it would do a bit better as a film than it would as a book because of the way that the book is written. My number one gripe is about how it is written. I think it's a very stream of consciousness book. There were a lot of choices with the grammar and the narrative as a whole, right? Like, she is writing to this author all throughout the book, and all of the tangents, I'm not gonna lie, I read them, but they like went right through me because they were just tangents, and I think that that's what they were supposed to feel like. So I don't know, it was just a really mixed thing. I'm not gonna go super into details with it. I gave it a 3. Truthfully, I kind of feel like this is a 2 because I'm not really recommending it to too many people. I feel like there are other books about motherhood and kind of tackling the same sort of topic, maybe, that probably did it better. But again, also, I'm not the demographic, so take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. Mother Thing by Ainsley Hogarth. This one, again, a letdown. I looked for it really hard. I don't know why I went through this rut where I had found all these books and I was like, oh my god, this is gonna be awesome. I don't know what in my head made me think that I was gonna like all of these. This one I feel like should have been a winner because this is a horror book. This is marketed as a horror book. The description is literally like a woman has to help her husband grieve the loss of his late mother, and then it turns out that his mother maybe never actually left. A haunting story, right? It is a haunting story for like 2 pages, and then it's never brought up again. And the rest of the book is just this woman losing her ever-living mind and exploring the fact that she doesn't know what it's like to have a mom. It's weird, and I feel like I would like it on weird points alone, and there are a lot of things that work for this, but there are also a lot of things that don't. I think a lot of the gripes I have with this are just personal ones. I don't think it's written poorly or anything. I think, you know, I don't know, I just feel like the biggest drawing point of the book is that it's like supposed to be like a haunted house story, and it's not a haunted house story. Unless you're like, I don't know, because you could be like, oh, it's just the grief, and I think that that's ultimately what the story is, but it's just, I'm just being a hater. It's just not done very well. It simply is not done very well. So I gave it a 3. The subplot was boring as fuck because there's also like this whole side thing where she works in a nursing home facility and there's a resident who is moving and she doesn't want them to move, and then that becomes a whole thing, but the ending to that comes out of left field, so it kind of just feels like it was put there as shock value. Like, it's a 3. It's a 3. I would recommend people read it because I feel like it could be fun, but it was not my cup of tea. Also, the cover art is beautiful for this, but don't let the cover art fool you. That happens with a couple of these, and I think that that was also what happened to me with Night Bitch. I was just really intrigued by the cover. And then my last book of the year was actually Tenders of Flesh by Augustina Bestriscia. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. If I didn't, don't correct me. Don't correct me. This was an interesting one to end off on. I gave this a 3-star, but not for the reasons that I had given other ones 3 stars previously. And actually, honestly, looking back at this, I would probably give it more like a 4. This book, you follow a man on his delivery route for a meat processing plant that he works for, but you're in a dystopian setting where animals aren't a thing anymore. So obviously the meat is something that is not an animal. A lot of people were putting this on like the extreme horror form and stuff on Reddit apparently, because my partner was actually telling me about it and was kind of warning me, because sometimes I get a little bit squeamish when I read like gore in books and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, I hadn't heard about that at all. So we were kind of confused about it. So he was telling me it was like an extreme horror book. When I read it, it was in fact not an extreme horror book. I feel like the horror bits come from the setting, you know, like it sets up like a really kind of gross idea, and then it just kind of talks about, you know, the basics of like a meat packing facility. I feel like I'm maybe just desensitized to it because I watched a lot of documentaries about like the meat industry when I was in college and when I was in high school and stuff like that. So that's something that I was kind of already familiar with. So if you're already familiar with that, it doesn't really get nasty to that extent. And I mean, even the descriptions of the gore aren't really bad. And truthfully, there isn't really a lot of gore either. I don't know. So it's just kind of interesting how people are classifying it. This is a translated work. It was originally in Portuguese, I believe. So this is a book that I would kind of be interested to see like what got lost in translation with, because I feel like some of these scenes may read differently in the mother language than they do in English. I'm wondering how much of the book we actually lost when it got translated. I just think some of these scenes might read a little bit differently. There are a lot of themes of like grief and just general family dysfunction. I think that was a really common thing with books that I read this year, so that wasn't too surprising. I really liked the main character until I just didn't anymore. The first half of the book is stellar. I really like this guy. And then something happens midway through the book where you're just kind of like, hello? Like, why did that happen? It feels out of pocket. It just feels like something he wouldn't have done. And that's the reason, again, I'm kind of thinking like how much of this got lost in translation, because was I always supposed to feel this way about this guy? So I don't know. The ending was definitely a gut punch, but I kind of almost want to say that you could have seen it coming, maybe. I don't know. It's a book that I would definitely just say that people should read. I can't talk too much about it without spoiling it, and this is a really good book and I want you to read it, but also it's a 3 for me. Like, I probably would not go back to read this again because I don't feel like it's so interesting that I would want to, but also I want to talk about it with other people. So other people should read this, but I will tell you it is pretty like church wafer plain. So that's all 24 books I read in 2024. It's a really interesting list. I had a pretty mid-year. I'm hoping this year I find ones that I actually like and resonate with a little bit more. My first read of the year that I've actually already started is Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. It's recommended by my partner. It's one that he thinks that I would really like. It is a fantasy book, but it's also kind of like sci-fi and kind of romancy. So I'll let you guys know how that goes. I've never read anything by Brandon Sanderson, but I know he's a really big fantasy author right now. I have some other things that I also have on the shelf that I need to get through. So we're getting there. I'm making progress. We got almost one down. So maybe if you guys like hearing me talk about the books, I'll keep wrapping you up and catching you up throughout the months so that I don't have to do a really big whoosh, rant and tangent over all of these guys. And my thoughts will be a little bit more coherent because I won't be filming this all at like 4 in the morning. I just decided I wanted to do it. So I had fun. Thanks for listening. If you want to keep hanging out, I do plan on doing a couple more things here. Probably not all book related, probably more about art, but also I'm not going to hold myself to any kind of standard. I'm just going to do whatever the hell I want to do. So if you want to hang out, subscribe. If you don't, whatever. See you later. Did you read any of these books? Do you disagree with me? Let me know. Do it kindly though, because if you're mean to me, I will fucking cry. All right, I'm going to get out of here because I'm going to pass out. Bye.